Hi, how's it going? This is Resident of Collingwood for YouTube. I'm here to read Chapter 10 of To Be Night and Beguile, written by John Philip Betancourt. Chapter 10, The Unraveling. I pronounced that right? Alright, here I go. Nightfall waves crashed upon the cliff side of the edge of Welshport Island, like constant explosions bashing into the rocky shore above, the rocky coastline where the Rest Ridge woods. Do not say that 5 times fast. They had a deep and thick canopy of oak, birch, and beech trees that floated on the little island that resembled and shared a green emerald stone in Frenchman Bay. In the gloom of the moon just beyond the West Ridge woods was St. Thomas Cemetery, a large plot of land covered in ancient tombstones and graves, etched on them the names of the island's ancestors, the first settlers from Wales, the native people who also once lived there, and of course the modern day citizens who lived and died. Okay, their beloved island village world. Standing on a dying green patch of grass of the cemetery, the hem of her dress soaked in the wetness from the soapy ocean air, and fresh drops of dew, stood Mary Good, shovel in hand, a wheelbarrow at her side, staring down at the freshly covered grave of Sebastian Lord. Through the dark brown dirt and mud, buried under heavy loads of soil, in a beautiful casket lined with the finest and softest velvet, Sebastian's body lay in death and darkness. His face a perfect pale white, his eyes closed and slumbering, his hands clasped perfectly together over his stomach, and his fingers tangled in the string of a golden rosary beads. Then a finger, his right forefinger, twitched, paused, then twitched again. The clouds seemed to float all around. There was no horizon in this place. There was no up, there was no down. There was no structure formed to make a building or any kind of distance to tell where one stood. It was a void filled with brightness and smoke or clouds, and a bright breeze that chilled the skin, but yet the sun that came through quickly made it warm again. Yet the sun was beyond invisible, unseen, yet seen. Sebastian was in this place. He was breathing, but he couldn't feel anything. Not sadness, not anger, not happiness, not any feeling. Then, in what seemed like the distance in this two-dimensional world, a shadow of a woman became clear. Her body was walking toward him, her hair flowing in the meandering breeze from nowhere. Closer and closer she got, and Sebastian, still dressed in the suit he was buried in, nervously backed away from the oncoming woman. Sebastian, her voice said. He recognized it and replied in his mind, not out loud, Mother? Sebastian, the voice said again, finally revealing as indeed coming from the beautiful eternal spirit of Sabrina Lord, Sebastian's dead mother. Where am I? Asked out loud. You've come to the end of where life sends you, but the beginning of a world eternal, my darling. This is eternal life. Death, heaven, she replied as she touched his face. He could feel her touch. I died? I was shot and I died. I've missed you so much. I cannot believe I'm seeing you again. This cannot be real. I'm dreaming. I must be back at Terramore. I must be there and dreaming or hallucinating. Please tell me that it's all a dream. Sebastian begged as he reached to grab his mother's hand, but her hands became transparent, and he could not touch her. I wish I I wish I could tell you that, but it's not. What you think, my love, you did die. Mary Good, she did kill you on the day of your wedding. I am so very sorry for that to have happened to you. I wish I could have stopped it. I wish a lot of things were different, but I made sure that you'd come back. You'll be back home soon, I promise, Sabrina said. I don't understand. If I died, how am I going back? He asked. It's the reason you have yet to feel the truth, grasp of what is to be a spirit. It's the reason you cannot feel anything around you. You see, you are not of this world. You have yet to fully leave this last world. Through Mary, I've asked. Sabrina paused before she finished her sentence carefully, choosing her words. A friend to help you. They're doing it now as I speak. Very shortly, Sebastian, you'll be back in the world of the living. So I have to explain everything. I don't have a lot of time, she said. Explain what? Sebastian asked. Sab- Sabrina stepped forward and smiled. She knew what she was about to do would change Sebastian forever. And when he returned to the living, he would know more than anyone could have ever hoped. For when solving the mystery of her own death, as she looked up at her handsome son, she touched his face again. He closed his eyes and felt a wave of light come over him. When he opened his eyes, he and Sabrina were on a blustery beach. He was still dressed in the suit he was buried in, and she in a white flowery gown, a similar dress to what he remembered her buried in. The waves were wild and crashing at their feet. The wind pulled at their clothes and hair like an invisible child teasing. What are we doing here? Sebastian asked, speaking loudly over the waves. Sabrina did not speak. She only pointed. Sebastian turned and saw two people coming their way. A woman running and a man right after her. It was Jacob Lord chasing his mother, Sabrina, on the day she was killed. Sabrina! Jacob screamed from behind, and Sabrina ran as fast as she could to the shore from the sandy dunes, just behind the path that led up to the West Ridge woods. As she ran, Jacob trailed, but not by far. The sand flung into the air from both of their feet, their hearts pounding, her hair waving about black and brown strands, thick and curly. He could almost smell the perfume that was coming off her hair that stuck to the wind. Her speed soon slowed as she came closer to the water. As she lost her shoes in the sand, okay. Her speed soon slowed as she came closer to the water. She had lost her shoes in the sand for what felt like miles. Behind her, her white dress flat flailed in the wind of her speed like a flag flying in a storm. Then, try she might, her own escape from Jacob failed her as soon stepped and fell into the sand face first. She got up quickly, but realized soon that she was trapped herself between him and the wild Atlantic. Her fall gave Jacob a split second to gain on her. He made a lunge and grabbed at her arm, but she tangled him in her skirt and was able to stay him off. You don't understand what you heard back there, Jacob said of the reason for her running from Terramore House. You're disgusting, she shouted over the crashing waves. You're making a mistake. What you heard at the house. You're making a big mistake, Jacob repeated. I heard every word, well and clear, you bastard. You will never ever get away with this. I promise you. As soon as you turn your back, I will tell your mother you've been plotting to have David and Sebastian killed to become the sole heir to your mother and father's fortune. You're a monster. I heard you tell that fake that Chard gasped for the two of you. You're murderers, she screamed. No, no, Jacob, as he lunged for Sabrina and tackled her there on the shore. She gasped for air as his heavy body pushed her deep into the wet sand. She slapped him across the face, scratching him under his eyes. He shouted at her, and she shook her by the shoulders and begged her to take back everything she was saying. You have no idea what you're talking about. Stop this, Sebastian shouted as he witnessed a terrible fight between Jacob and Sabrina. But of course no one heard this screams. He were only there in spirit, seeing the truth once and for all. It will happen quickly, Sabrina said in spirit of her own death. Make him stop, Sebastian said, crying to his mother's ghost. Shh, it's over, she said. As a tear came from her eye, Sebastian turned and saw Jacob standing over Sabrina's drowned body. He had suffocated her right there in the sand because she knew too much. She discovered his plot to have his family members killed, all or money. Her death was a silencing the truth. But that wasn't all. Sabrina then closed her eyes and touched Sebastian's, where the light once again enveloped, enveloped, enveloped them completely, then darkening. When Sebastian opened his eyes, he was in a large darkening room of Terramore House. There David had fallen asleep, drunk, and smelling of cigar smoke and booze. His clothes were crumpled, his hair a mess, after a 3-day drinking spree led his whole life to this point. This is where Jacob's plot got even more deranged. I tried to convince you to let her go, but you didn't. You just kept fighting me and telling me that she needed to die, Jacob told David, who was somewhat still in a daze in the gloomy room from his hangover. What? That's not true. It didn't happen. No, I can't believe that. Where is she? Where is Sabrina? David begged his younger brother. David, she's out on the beach. They'll find her soon, and then they'll see you killed your own wife. I was there, David. I saw it. I tried to stop it, and you just kept going on. In a drunken rage, you kept saying she was having an affair with me, and then you drowned her. Your own son's mother, Jacob said, lying. My God, Jacob, what do I do? What do I do? Please tell me. I can't remember the alcohol. I've been upset. I've been so unwell and I just drink to stop the pain. But I've never ever been violent or jealous. I cannot understand this. Please, uh, it must have been an accident, David said through sobs. It was no accident, Jacob said in a sinister voice, pretending to be disgusted by David. In truth, he was disgusted with himself. What do I do? We have to tell everyone I didn't do it, David begged. But you did do it. And now you have to go leave this place and never return, David. Never come back to this place ever again. I'd even say you should leave this earth, Jacob said. Jacob, they'll find me. They'll go looking for me and they'll find me. Uh, Right. No. How can I look Sebastian, my son, my child, in the eyes ever again? When they find me knowing that I took his mother's life, well, there has to be something else, David said. Well, there is one thing, Jacob replied as he took a sip from a freshly poured brandy and the winced in pain from the cut under his eye. The lighthouse. Go to the lighthouse. And Jacob paused to wipe his mouth, but David understood. Jump, David whispered in response. Oh my God, Sebastian said of what he was witnessing. One more, Sabrina said as she once again took Sebastian to another place, the last place before she went him back to the living. There we now on the cliffside of the southern tip of the Welshport Island, on the small stretch of land where the lighthouse was. David stared out into the sea. He let the light of the lighthouse guide his way down as he jumped from the top of the lighthouse and into Frenchman Bay below. Sebastian screamed at watching his father take his life. He tried to go and help, but his mother grabbed his arm and went and sent him back with her into this place filled with light. So he's gone too, washed away like a lost ship into the sea. Where is he now, mother? Why didn't he come with you? Sebastian asked, looking around to see his father's spirit too. Sebastian, your father isn't here. He survived that fall. But where he is, I do not know. Perhaps when he can face the truth and the world again, he will return. But this is not my mission now. I brought you here to and find a way for you to go back and force Jacob into the truth. He must be brought to justice for what he's done to you, to me, to your father. His time is up and you'll be the one to do it, Sabrina said. But how? How will I? Sebastian asked. Sabrina smiled, walked up to Sebastian and gave him a hug. Huge hug, just as Marigold struck her fist thrust of the shovel into the ground of Sebastian's grave. In their embrace, Sabrina whispered what Sebastian had to do next. Just hold your breath, son. That night, a slick black automobile with chrome bumpers was parked on the curb outside of a small pub called the Siren's Call, near the center of the village. Inside, local sailors drank their sunburnt faces and exhausted bodies into fights of fire and laughter over random stories, wild storms over the dark blue waters of the Atlantic. Cowering in the corner in a smoke-filled booth was Gaspar and Jacob, both standing out in their well-tailored suits and perfectly combed hair. Gaspar's facial hair perfectly carved over the bones of his face, as he looked down at a small envelope that Jacob pushed over to him on the table. I swear I didn't do that. How could I? How could I jump 3 feet over my chair and 7 feet over the wall to the wall? I'm telling you, Jacob, I had nothing to do with that. What happened at the seance? It wasn't me, Gasper said in his true English accent. You're not fooling me, Jacob said. Damn it, Jacob, I swear on it all. I know it wasn't me. Am I to believe in ghosts and sorcerers now, like my mother, and ghouls and goblins that haunt us in our sleep? You can't fake with me. I pay you too much, Jacob smirked as he puffed on his cigar. Another drink, sir? A busty waitress asked as she smiled at the rich lord family member, his face well known in town. Pay, I'm still waiting, Gaspar replied. Yes, two, please, Jacob replied, pointing to Gaspar's empty glass. Now, let's talk about my new niece, shall we? Jacob added, speaking of Evie. No, not until you tell me what the hell happened at that seance. I don't know how much longer I can do all this. It's been months of tricks, of smoke and mirrors, but last night, that was something else, Gaspar said. All right, all right. I admit it, it was me. When your eyes were closed, I yanked on you and tosses you across the room, Jacob said, lying. You? That's right, me. Now you can calm your little brain and we can move on to Evie, Jacob said. Jacob's clear lie did the job with the two-sided coin. On one side, its Gaspar's fear of the shock of the seance were quenched, as he chose to believe Jacob rather than to believe the horror of a spirit grabbing at him and throwing him across the room. And on the other side, Jacob too could ignore what he saw and pretend it didn't happen. It was all too real, too powerful, too much for even his mind to wrap around. For Jacob, it had better to lie and move on than to dwell on truth. He had bigger fish to fry. What about Evie? Gaspar asked, noticing Jacob remove something from his jacket pocket. Open the envelope, Jacob said as the waitress stopped 2 mugs of beer down on a stocky table. Gaspar waited for the waitress to leave again and opened the envelope. It had been tied with a red tired, tied with a red string securing it closed. He pulled out a 3/4 fold of paper and unfolded it. It was Rebecca's will. Don't stain it. I have put it where I found it. But move your eyes down to the 5th paragraph. That's where our next move really begins, Jacob instructed. Gaspar moved his eyes down. A long-winded last will testament of Rebecca that had been updated 6 days before Evie's arrival to Welshport just in time for the wedding, and without Jacob knowing. This can't be right. We were sure that after David was declared dead and Sebastian's death was in the clear, you'd get everything, and we could finally take the steps to Gaspar paused and looked around the pub before saying his next few words, as they might incriminate him, making sure your mother never saw another dime. He finished feeling comfortable in the lack of eavesdroppers. Well, my mother is ever the organizer. She made sure that it was all set this way. If something should happen to Sebastian after his wedding, she of course was thinking about his possible children, but since we didn't let this marriage get that far, that means it all goes to Evie. And thanks to Mary and her shit shooting, we still have that bird in the bush. We can't let this happen. Evie cannot remain the heiress of half my fortune, Jacob said coldly. Gaspar took a deep breath and a gulp of his drink. He knew where Jacob's altered mind was going, "No, I can't do it. No, I can't have someone else kill Jacob. Please, for God's sakes. There's been too much death already. After that insane seance, I've even thought about leaving your mother out of this, too, and await her natural death out. I can't take it," Gasper said, the strain on his voice showing signs of emotional break. "No, you're right. It would look too strange anyway, to suddenly lose another family member so close to Sebastian's untimely demise. The will doesn't talk about Evie's death for her to be removed from the will. Look, it says death or incapacitation. Incapacitation, Jacob showed. What does that mean? Jasper wondered. Paralyze her? Jacob smiled grimly. His mind was a diabolical machine that was always thinking of himself first, and secondly, how to ruin the lives of the people he was supposed to love, all to grab any kind of money or power he could. Jacob took another sip of his drink and carefully dabbed his mouth with a linen napkin that had the pub's name, Siren's Call, put on it along with the golden mermaid tangled in a fishing net. Jasper, would you say if Evie would want most after what would you say Evie would want most after what happened to Sebastian? Jacob asked something radically. For it all to go away and Sebastian to be with her again, alive. Jasper replied, his voice in Yoggish was very good, and would that be possible? Jacob asked again, somewhat theoretically. Obviously not, he's dead. But what if Evie insisted Sebastian was alive? What if she said she actually saw him running around Terramore? Jacob asked again. She'd sound mad, insane, like a lunatic. She'd sound incapacitated, Jacob replied, grinning. Suddenly, Gasper began to see what Jacob was spelling out for him. Together, inside the smoky, loud, ruckus-filled Siren's Call, the pub, the two money-hungry co-conspirators devised a plan to fake Sebastian's sightings that only Evie would see, driving her mind into the dark and horrible place, driving her mind to spin out of control. For everywhere she turned, she'd see relics and souvenirs, even shadowy visions of Sebastian himself, all in a ploy to drive the girl mad and send her off out of Rebecca's will. What if she doesn't take to it? Gasper wondered. Oh, she will, you'll see, won't you, Sebastian? Jacob said with a chuckle, naming Gasper as the person to play the fake ghostly Sebastian to drive Evie out of her mind. In her bedroom, Charlotte brushed her long blonde hair in a mirror as her grandmother stepped in to check on her. It was the day after the seance, and Rebecca was still feeling shaky after the event. Darling, it's time for bed, Rebecca replied. Charlotte smiled and dropped her brush and ran over to the bed and jumped in. Rebecca walked over and pulled a thick wet blanket over Charlotte's white legs and tucked her in. Now close your eyes and get to sleep. Tomorrow is another day, Rebecca said sweetly as she blew out a candle next to the girl's bed. When Rebecca looked up from the cable back at Charlotte, the shadow of the night reflected a woman's face. It was now the young girl's. It was Sabrina's face in the bed. Rebecca recognized it and screamed. Sabrina, scaring little Charlotte, who screamed back at her grandmother, but the face in the bed screaming was still Sabrina's. Rebecca quickly reached into the pouch of her long maroon dress and pulled out a match and lit it. Rebecca's eyes were glaring, her heart pounding, and she slowly moved the small lit match closer to Charlotte's face. see it better, and when the glow met its place, Sabrina's face was gone. Charlotte's return. What is what if what is it, Grandma? Why did you scream? Charlotte asked, even though she knew. I saw something. I don't know what I saw, Rebecca said, blowing out the match and retucking in her possessed granddaughter. I'm sorry if I frightened you, my love. Go on, get to sleep. Rebecca made sure Charlotte was cozy in bed and then turned to make her way out of the room. She turned again and looked one last time, and in the moonlight saw blonde hair in the bed. She looked and a sigh of relief, but whispered to the someone she thought she saw. It was you at the seance, wasn't it, Sabrina? What do you want? There was no answer. Rebecca felt silly and thought perhaps she was just tired and did not see Sabrina's spirit in the bed. As she closed the door to Charlotte's room, Sabrina reappeared in the bed with her dark hair and smiled. As night slithered into dawn, Mary Good dug and dug and dug into the grave of Sebastian Lord, not knowing what she would find. The deeper she went, the darker the mud was, the deeper she went, the more wet the smell of soil lifted from the bowls of the St. Thomas Cemetery, bowels of the St. Thomas Cemetery, and into her nostrils. The strange sensation of breathing in air coming from the ground filled with the dead nauseated Mary, but she kept digging. Her hair was heavy with sweat, her arms sore and cramping from the work. She felt like she could no longer go on. She was now deep inside the grave. She looked up into the sky, her blonde hair wet and stuck to her forehead. She was now a purple sky signaling the coming dawn. She could not carry Sebastian in the wheelbarrow in the daylight. It was too risky. She had to continue. She had to get him back to Good Island before anyone noticed. Inside the coffin, Sebastian's fingers twitched. Again, then another finger. This, his thumb. Then this whole right hand. It twitched so much the rosary tangled in his fingers fell to the side of his body. His chest then started to lift with breath. His heart once again beating slow and steady. Eliza's spell of everlasting life had worked, as was Sabrina's hope when she ordered Mary to go home and tell Eliza what she had done through her possession of Charlotte. With his breathing not now slow but steady, Sebastian woke up, his eyes flicked open. He gasped for air, but he received was a small dose of what was left in the coffin. Oh my God! Oh my God! He screamed as he realized where he was. Help me! Help me! Help me! He screamed as he pounded on the lid of his coffin, already close to the lid. Mary heard his muffled screams. He's alive? She said out loud to herself. The pounding from inside the coffin became more and more urgent. As Sebastian began to panic, he used his arms and fists. He used his legs and feet. He rocked back and forth inside his little locked box, but nothing could free him. He was becoming hysterical, and as the panic began to set in deeper into his brain, and his screams began to take up the oxygen left in the coffin chamber, he was getting dizzy now, sleepy even. He slapped himself and screamed again for help, hoping somebody would hear him. Not knowing Mary was on her way from the top digging him out. As she continued to dig as fast as she could, Sebastian's time in air was running out. He began to see stars and black spots in the dark coffin. He began to hallucinate and see light coming from the open lid, but it was his mind trying to manifest an escape. He reached up with the last bits of energy as the oxygen was running out, and pulled down the velvet lining over his face. The fatal mistake, the lining, began to suffocate him as it collapsed all around his body, trapping him even more. He was tangled now, withering and wiggling down. All he could do is escape his trap. Then everything went black. Now deep in the ground, Mary's shovel hit the lid. She quickly began to dig around the edge, giving her enough space to place her fingers in the groove and pull the lid to the coffin. She pulled and pulled. The pressure of the soil that had been on top lid caused suction effect that lit the lid collapsed on tight, but Mary did not give up. She pulled and pulled, even breaking her three nails from her fingers in a bloody slice. And finally the lid gave way. A large popping sound occurred, and Mary fell back. She quickly got up, her dress stained with the dark mud from top to bottom, her face marked with tear stains that made small trails from her eyes down to her cheeks through the dirt that had caked on her face. She reached into the coffin and pulled the velvet lining off the Sebastian's face. She stared at him, beautiful as he was, looking asleep and in peace, but his chest was there was breath. She reached up and slapped his face. His eyes twitched and moved under the skin of his eyelids. Wake up, damn you, wake up, she said, shaking him from his shoulders. There was no time to waste. The sun was coming. She needed to get Sebastian back to her mother under the cover of whatever darkness there was left. With all her might and adrenaline, she somehow managed to drag his body up from the grave and into an awaiting wheelbarrow, and covered his whole body with the cloak. And there she left the open cemetery plot and rushed down the hill of St. Thomas Cemetery towards the docks 2 miles out, where her small boat was and where she'd load the unconscious body of Sebastian moored, and hoped that he'd survive the small and yet treacherous ride to Good Island. Ah, so that's chapter 10 of To Benight and Beguile. So you find out that Jacob killed Sabrina and that Jacob convinced David, Sebastian's dad, and Sabrina's husband to jump. Now, he did not die, so he's out there somewhere alive. Which what which is what caused the whole rumors. David was drunk, so. But Jacob's lies and Gaspar's involvement have sort of caused all of this. So now they have a plot of, well, let's drive Evie crazy. Um, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I really like how you have this guy plotting, and my biggest thing is now David's out there. Like, where did he go? That's an interesting little thing because I don't believe anyone does know where he went. I'm not just talking about Sabrina. I'm talking about Mary's mother. I don't think anybody knows where he's at all. David knows where he is, I'm sure, but I don't think anyone else knows where he is. It will be interesting to see what happens with Sebastian. Link is going to be in the description box, guys.